Hello and welcome to this chess endgame review of queen versus pawn. And normally a queen versus a lone pawn would win, but there are some exceptions. And before we get into one of those exceptions, let's first review and see how a queen should be able to win. All right, in this position, it's white's turn, and we have a race to promote pawns here. And white promotes first with check. So the king must move out of the way, and now white just moves the queen to h4 here to cut off the promotion of this pawn. And so the king moves down here to assist the pawn in pushing forward, but we have another check. So we see how the queen will continually check the opponent's king and now attack the pawn, forcing that king to protect the pawn. But we have a check here. And this forces the black king to step in front of his pawn. And now this gives white time to move his king closer. Because in this position, the queen cannot win alone. The king must assist in a mate here. So the king tries to move out to once again threaten a pawn push. But now we have a pin by the queen, pinning this pawn to the king so the pawn cannot move forward. And so the king moves down here to protect the pawn, but we have a check again. And once again, attacking the pawn, the king must protect, and this move once again, forcing the king to move in front of his pawn. And the white king, can move forward after this. Okay, so white just continues this maneuver of harassing the black king and checking, and then forcing that king to get in front of the pawn, giving him time to move his king forward to help the white queen. All right, now we have check, forcing the king to get in front of the pawn once again, and now the king is in position to help mate here. So that was an example of how to win with the queen versus a pawn, but there are certain instances where the queen cannot win. So let's look at this next example here. All right, here it is white's turn to move, and he checks the king, or excuse me, the queen checks the king, and after the king moves, we have another check. The king kind of moves around but stays close to his pawn that he's trying to promote. And we see here that the white king is too far away to assist. And there is no way to bring this king forward, because in this position, once the king is in front of the pawn, it would just be stalemate here if the king moved forward. So this is a position where white cannot get the king forward, bring the king forward to help in the checkmate, and it would just end up being a draw here. So let's look at another similar example. If we continued from this position, but if we have the king already close, then it would be a different story here, as queen to d1. If the king moves here, check. And this is one strategy. Once you get your queen in front of the pawn, that pawn cannot move forward, and you will be able to capture it with the help of the king here, and white would win. And there's an even faster way to win if we look at that from the beginning. So instead of this queen to d1 check, white could also play queen to c3, forcing the king to move to b1 here. And then this mate is also possible. So two different ways that white could win in this position with the help of the king here. So let's move on to another example. All right, so in this position, white's turn to move, and we have queen to f6. The king moves out of the way, but we have a check here. And the queen keeps harassing the king. And now, this is very interesting. The king moves forward and allows this pawn to promote. But now we will see the king moving even closer, and black is in trouble here. There's nothing he can do. The queen is trying to prevent possible mate threats, but what can black do here? If the queen moves, we just have, well, here, I'll give you a few examples. If the queen were just to move out of the way, up here, of course, we would just have a mate. So if we go back, the computer recommends the best moves as queen to a3 or a4, which just gives away your queen. So anyway, if the king tries to move to here, then we have a mate on c2. So black is just lost here in this position, which was quite interesting, letting the pawn promote, but bringing your king up closer to the game, or closer to the action. All right, another example here. All right, so once again, the king is in closer to the action here, and we have check, the king moves, and now the king moves closer. But if there's a promotion, we have a mate like this. So there's another way for a mate to occur here in this position. And that is because the king was able to get closer in to assist the queen. When the king is, far away across the board and cannot get there in time, it could lead to a draw, as we saw earlier. All right, one final example here of queen versus pawn. All right, so this is a position to be aware of when the pawn is one square away from promoting, and on the C file, C2 or G2, or for the other side of the board. Anyway, the C or G file, one square away from promotion. The game may go like this: queen to B6, king must move to the corner here. If the king were to move up here instead, well, then we could have queen to D4. Once the king moves, queen to A1 would allow that process of the queen getting in front of the pawn, and then black is just losing there, because once the queen stops the pawn by getting in front of it, the king is able to move forward, and this pawn will fall and white will win. So in order to avoid that, if we go back to the beginning, after a check by the queen, the king does not want to move forward. So here we would have the queen, or excuse me, the king moving into the corner there. And another option to look at is this: the king moving in front of the pawn. Well, that would lead to trouble as well, as it allows the king to move in here and help with the attack. And then this queen move pinning the pawn so it cannot move forward. And now black is just in trouble here, because in this position, what can he do? Just move to b1, and then you have a mate. So, in order to avoid that, back at the beginning, after check, the king must move into the corner here. And then we have a check. The king moves to protect the pawn. Another check, and back into the corner. And so we repeat this process. And now, once again, the king goes into the corner. And what can be done here? If the pawn is captured, it would be a stalemate. Otherwise, the pawn here will promote, and so this game would just be a draw in this position. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed some of these examples of queen versus pawn, and I would just advise you to practice these on your own, set them up, and play against friends or a computer to try and improve and review these positions. But they are interesting, and they can come about when you're having a race to see who can promote a pawn first. And this will help you decide what to do in an end game, if you will be winning or if the game may lead to a draw. All right, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Feel free to check out my Nick Butts Chess channel and enjoy more videos. And leave comments or suggestions as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.